Hey, Diana. So last week, the church announced that they were extending the age cutoff for single adult wards from 31 to 35. So, how did it feel to find out that you were a YSA again?
I was not stoked. And I was confused why everyone was treating us like this was some incredible landmark announcement. People
Right.
kept linking me to it, like, look, you're young again. There's kind of this vibe, like, what an unforgettable day, as though this was, you'll never forget where you were the morning the Twin Towers fell, that kind of experience. And it just wasn't that for me. I don't think it comes close to addressing the broader question about where singles fall in the church, but it kicks the can down the road a few years. And I guess that helps
Yeah.
some people.
It felt similarly unremarkable for me, and you could not suck me back into the YSA ward for anything. I'm very happy in my conventional ward. And to be told that I'm technically deemed as not too old to be in a pool of single people who could date each other, I guess, is a compliment.
Yeah.
But
Well, in the
yeah.
spirit of our 59-year-old Kamala Harris, all of a sudden branded it this youthful thing with decades,
Yeah.
potentially three ahead of her.
Age is relative. If you're
Age
compared
is
to
relative these
an
days, right?
81-year-old man, then
Yeah.
59 is a spring
Yeah.
chicken.
We're all younger than we thought we were. You're listening to The Soloists, and we are a new podcast in the Faith Matters Podcast Network. I'm Diana Brown, and I'm working with my good friend here, Mallory Everton, on bringing you conversations on connection and beauty and spiritual growth. We're going to be talking a lot about singleness, which is awkward, admittedly, but not just about that, not even close to just about that. We really want to get into all of the bugs that are swimming in the water right now, culturally speaking, that are making it harder to commit to and belong to other people, and just get curious about the entire ecosystem in which our relationships are being formed. So today we want to talk about singles wards and where they came from. Mallory, do you want to explain what a singles ward is?
Yes. A singles ward is a congregation made up of only single people, other than the bishop and sometimes his counselors. These wards don't just provide a religious experience, but also a whole social system for these singles activities and temple trips and diners club, and sometimes even family home evening with assigned brothers and sisters. While it's not a requirement, it's culturally encouraged for all single people previously between the ages of 18 and 31, but now between 18 and 35, to go to a singles ward until they get married or until they age out. At that point, if they don't have a bishop who looks the other way about the age restrictions in his congregation, they get absorbed into a conventional ward with families and married people and old people and babies, or they attend an SA ward, which is a singles ward for people now 36 and older. As you could imagine, once you're in this single system, if you don't get yourself married, you could go a long time without being around married people or children or the elderly at church. The question we'll be asking in our conversation today is how the constant focus on marital status affects our belonging in the body of Christ.
In preparation for this conversation, I've been Googling and scrolling to get a feel for how singles in other religious communities feel, which explains why I keep getting ads popping up on my Instagram for Jewish and Muslim matchmaking services. Very tempting. Anyway, for reasons we'll unpack in future conversations, religion and married life often mutually support each other, which means that singles can often experience themselves as misfits in their congregations. Some singles prefer to seamlessly blend into the broader fabric of their religious community rather than to be singled out for this point of difference, and others want more singles exclusive spaces to network and to support each other through this specific life situation. It seems no one is super happy. When it comes to belonging, how do you highlight a potential obstacle to one's belonging in order to address it without constantly drawing attention to the fact that one doesn't belong? And where is the line between building special venues to support a group and ghettoizing that group from the broader community? Is it possible that in drawing attention to this difference, you make that category, singleness in this case, more vulnerable than it needs to be? Love them or hate them, LDS singles wards might be the most elaborate experiment with building a singles exclusive religious community that is out there anywhere. But as we'll be learning in just a moment, LDS singles wards actually didn't start as a place to support singles. They began as student wards that later became known for their fun activities and opportunities to meet people to date. And somewhere along the line, this latter reason came to be thought of as the formal purpose for them to get people married. The age range for inclusion into singles wards keeps creeping higher and higher. And with this latest announcement increasing the age range for singles wards up to 35, now seems like the perfect time to look a little bit closer at their legacy and to ask a few questions. To do that, we're going to be talking with Dr. Sharon Harris, who researched and published on the history of LDS singles wards in 2016. Sharon is an English professor at Brigham Young University with a background in music education, and she lives with her husband and two very cool sons in Provo, Utah.
In this conversation, we'll hear from Sharon about where singles wards came from, what their initial intent was, and discuss what happens to us spiritually when we shine a blinding light on singleness. She writes, as the church has repeatedly emphasized marriage as a universal goal, some members have conflated marriage with adulthood. In many ways, this is understandable. Church members learn that marriage is requisite for the highest spiritual attainment, church leadership, and life satisfaction. Consequently, Mormon culture generally treats single status as, at best, temporary and undesirable, and at worst, pathological and damning.
All right. And with that, let's jump into the conversation with Sharon.
I ended up doing a summer seminar on the history of the culture of the church in the family with Richard and Claudia Bushman in 2014. And I found myself in Provo that summer. Ostensibly, I had been there to try and be closer to somebody I was dating, and that relationship didn't work out. And so then I was just a single person yet again in Provo for a summer. And at that point, I was in my early 30s, and I have been single for a long time. And I found myself, as we're having this seminar on the culture of the family, wondering, how did I get here? You know, I've been to many singles wards. I've been a singles ward family home evening group leader. I've done all these cultural things and gone to conferences, etc. And how did I get here? And so that's what I opted to do for this seminar on this history, and wanted to find out where singles wards came from. So
Honestly,
Awesome.
that is why I felt so much relief reading your words. I mean, this is just part of being a religious person, right? If you're going to be a part of an organized religion, then at some point you're probably going to butt up against structures and trying to understand how much God was in this structure, how much intention was in this structure. So I'd love for you to maybe lay out a little bit for people how long the singles population has been a concern in the church and how the structure of singles wards developed. So that was really
sure.
helpful for me to hear.
Sure. Well, and I mean, I think there have always been single members of the church, right? But as far as I could tell, in the early part of the 20th century, there became more and more programs set up for young adults, and including institute programs, right? So there are institutes that are popping up all over, especially in California. There's places where they become institute programs, and they become very active. And it's a place for people who go to college to expand their gospel learning and then also meet other people, right, while they're there. So that's going on. But what really seems to launch singles wards, as far as I can tell, the earliest singles ward is in Provo, associated with BYU, right after World War II, when you had enrollment booms at universities all over the country. You had the GI Act, and it became easier for all of these people who returned from war to go to college, and lots of incentives for that to happen. And what happened at BYU was that BYU students had always been a part of the Provo East stake. They were just folded into the regular stake that was there. With the enrollment boom, BYU started building student housing, and they built housing for students who were single and students who were married. And as this enrollment boom coincides with building student housing, the East Stake becomes overwhelmed. Like, they have accounts of 1,500 people showing up to a sacrament meeting, and
Crazy.
2,000 people. 2,000 people. This is the LDS Church's megachurch era.
Wow.
At Sunday schools, right? And so the East Stake leadership just said, this is untenable. We got to do something about this.
Sure.
And they decided to create BYU wards, and then they grew into stakes, right? But because wards tend to be organized geographically, and you had single student housing, married student housing, then you had this creation of a singles ward, right? That's really what got things started. You get the creation of a singles ward at BYU around 1947. And then as student population continues to rise, it becomes very popular. When Ernest Wilkinson becomes the president of BYU, I think he saw these student wards as an opportunity to offload the activities of the university to the student wards. And so he
Mhm.
made a policy saying that BYU would not be sponsoring the chess club per se, or certainly fraternities and sororities, anything
Right,
like that.
right.
All activities were centered in the wards. And so they become these huge social hubs and activity centers for students, especially if they're single.
Mm.
Um, and then you have people coming from all over the country to BYU, having this experience in a student ward, and then going back home and loving it, and other people wanting to be a part of this and feeling like they're, missing out if they don't have this kind of single adult social experience. And as far as I can tell, that really started to spread the development of student wards. They were often affiliated with institute programs and universities initially, and they were primarily student wards. And then
Yeah.
as you get later into the 20th century, there's this debate about should we have singles wards per se. And this was the part that was interesting to me. It did not start as like, how can we get people married? It was
Mhm.
just
Right,
a practical
Right.
problem
right.
to solve.
I loved reading about this. So I went to BYU, so that was my only college experience, right? And then I worked at Georgetown University. I was working there for 6 years, and I was part of what tends to be a large apparatus at most universities of administrators who are beefing up the extracurricular things that college students are doing. And it really surprised me when I got to Georgetown. I was like, what is this? These spoiled kids? There's people catering meals for them all the time, planning overnight retreats, all these special clubs. And I was like, we didn't get this at BYU. And then it dawned on me one time. I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. The singles wards did that. That is the plan for
Right.
BYU students. That's what takes care of their social lives is the local wards.
Well, and then the problematic implication that, like you were saying, Sharon, the purpose is to get people married when that was clearly
Uh-huh.
not purpose at all. But man, did I in my 20s feel like the purpose of those
Mhm.
singles wards was to
Uh-huh.
just shove me in a fish tank with a bunch of other loose fishes,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Right. And go along, make it happen. You'll
Yeah.
meet each other, and this is how the kingdom rolls forward. Yeah.
Sharon, there's another piece I wanted to draw out that you started with even before the organization of the student branch at BYU. You drew a connection to an institute that had developed where the
Yes.
concern there was around education and higher ed and how do you keep students active when they're exposed to all of these different ideas at school.
Sure.
So that
Yeah.
seems something there too, is that there's an awareness that your world is broadening and you need a safe holding place.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting how much, I don't know what everybody's experience is, but certainly I've been a part of several wards for single members in the United States, and there's been a big emphasis on family home evenings in those,
Mm-hmm.
where the ward really is kind of takes the role of your family, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
have
Totally.
a mom and dad, and you have the kids who all get together it used to be Monday night or whatever it is. I don't know that's quite the case now, but yeah, this sort of let's have a structure that can provide the support that a family would provide while you go away, while you leave home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right that this concern over retention and having people stay active in the faith is a really powerful motivating factor. I mean, it didn't start this way, but it evolved into this idea that if we can get people to go to singles wards, have a great time, find each other, get married, then they can do everything that the church is hoping that they will do.
Diane and I were talking earlier about purpose and how much of our conversations around singleness end up circling around the idea of purpose and how church helps with that, how church can hinder that. And that is one of the tricky things about singles wards is that I feel like it points you to the purpose of being here, the purpose of going to church is to get married. And it can really impoverish your religious experience. I know I experienced that where it felt a little bit more like a meat market. You get that feeling like there's a lot of performing happening.
Yep.
I've been in a family ward for about a year now, and everybody's experiences are all over the map on this. I'm really sensitive to that. But my experience has been it's been much easier for me to find Christ
Uh-huh.
in my family ward.
Yeah.
And it's not that that there weren't beautiful people in my singles wards, but it felt like there were strong veneers between us as we were
Mm-hmm.
performing and in dating mode, in
Mhm.
performing mode, in pick me mode, which is
Right.
Yeah.
very different than I'm coming to church and I pick you, person who has no one to sit with. I pick you, lady who's at a assisted living home and doesn't have someone to help her get home today. Like family wards just it just feels easier in that way.
Mm.
So that idea that the purpose is shifted toward marriage when that wasn't even the intention is really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is a weird thing to be like the way you put that about purpose. You're conflating what's supposed to be your spiritual refuge
Mhm.
in a way with your dating life.
Like
So I want to
horrifying.
preface this, but
It is
right. And
Like
horrifying.
it's
Yeah.
horrifying.
yes,
Those things
Like
shouldn't mix.
I
what
I
could be less in your control? What could feel
really,
less like a sanctuary than
uh-huh.
the dating market? I'm in
Yes.
LA. It is
It's true.
bleak.
Yeah, that was me too. Like, so I want to make clear, I I had really fantastic experiences in many of the wards that I attended and made friends that I've kept to this day. And there's a variety of experiences available, but I remember the first time that I went to the singles ward in New York City when I moved there for grad school. And I had chosen a nice name brand sweater and a little cute
Mhm.
skirt. I had summery sandals. I was like, "That's fine, right? I look fine." And I get there and I just realized, whoa. First of all, I I was not prepared for the way that that what you're wearing
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
signals what you intend or where you belong or what kind of people you should hang
mm.
out with, et cetera. And then I also found, and this is not a surprise probably in New York, but that people would say, okay, so you're new, tell me about yourself. And I had basically 20 to 30 seconds. You have an elevator speech and you
Oh
know,
yeah.
watch their eyes glaze over or whatever. And then I knew I don't know if you're going to talk to me again. If I didn't catch your
Right.
interest, it's hard to have that experience and then also be like, wow, I feel so spiritually strengthened, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of purpose, one of the points of your article, Sharon, was you talk about how it's not clear that there was a purpose. It's just kind of evolved. It feels like all of the things that people have come to secondhand attribute as the purpose of singles wards weren't necessarily it. Part of it was
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
retention when you're away from school because secular ideas might be threatening. Part of it
Right.
was just sheer crisis. We've got too many people. We need to do something with them. Part of it was like, oh, this is really fun. People are having a great time together. Let's like do more of it. And then expectations grow. And it feels like there's just all of these myths about what the purpose is, which leads to the sense when you're walking in of what
Yeah.
really is this?
Right.
Really. And then especially in those moments when you're talking to
Mhm.
somebody and you see their eyes like glaze over and look at somebody behind you. It's those moments you're like, what's going on here? And how is
Right.
this supposed to be supporting my spiritual development? I've
And
been thinking,
it's not
oh, go
anything
ahead.
like it's not anything against, the members who are doing it. We're just kind of conditioned to have multiple goals going on, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's coming up for me as we're talking is it feels a little unpreventable in some ways that you're going to have an ulterior motive going to a singles ward.
Yeah.
Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
just, I'm not just here to have my cup filled. I'm
Right.
also here to try and find somebody to partner up with. I'm also here to
Mhm.
try and find my person. And that I think inherently muddies your spiritual water.
Yeah,
Like
for
Totally.
you're
sure.
not just there to commune with God, you're not just there to worship. And so the popularity contest stuff that you're describing makes sense
Mhm.
because you have this other motive. And maybe a single person can't get away from that at church.
Mhm.
Maybe they can't because man, I pray that eventually I stop doing this. But like anytime I see like a man within 15 years of my age, I'm like, I have to look at his hand. And
Right.
that is really unhelpful.
Right.
That's really
Mm-hmm.
unhelpful.
And this is tricky because what you're describing is when you go to a singles ward, there's always this idea that this is not intended to be a permanent landing spot,
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's supposed to be temporary, it's supposed to be provisional while you're in this liminal state of being single, and that this isn't actually where you're supposed to be, which I really appreciate the idea that people overall, I think, are not intended to be alone. Like we want to have community,
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
whatever that looks like. We want to partner, we want to have families. Um, at the same time, that's not something that any individual has complete control over. And so you're put in this space because you are in a status of life that you don't have control over. It's supposed to be temporary, but then what if it lasts for decades.
Yeah, or your whole life.
And so it's temporary, but also we started extending the age of singles wards to be older and older. And one of the things that this does is it takes a whole segment of the church population and separates them from what's considered the sort of default bulk majority of the church.
Yeah.
Right? Family wards, or I've called them conventional wards, because you have all kinds of different families in those wards, right?
I like that.
And that's the way the church is supposed to look. We have this situation that we're trying to negotiate with single members, and so we put them in this other place. When I was in New York, just before I left, they created a single stake. Now, here's the thing about the New York stake.
Wow.
Yeah, the Manhattan stake that I was in, before they created the single stake, was two-thirds of the members of the stake were single. Now,
Wow.
it felt like this was this kind of secret that we weren't actually supposed to know just how many people are single. In fact, when I was doing this research, it was very difficult to get real numbers about the percentage of members of the church who are single, as though like we don't really want to admit that it's this bad, so to speak, right?
Oh, gracious. Yeah.
Which all of that signaling is just so rough.
Yeah, it's rough for all of us.
Oh, you don't want to admit how many of us there are. You don't want to admit that this is the problem that it is. Well, that we're labeling it as such is already its own problem. And so I was really grateful when a few years back, Elder Gong acknowledged in General Conference, 50% of the membership of the church is single, right? I think that's just important to say outright. But if you attend many wards, especially in the United States or various places maybe around the world, but especially in the United States, if you attend a typical LDS ward, you don't have the impression that half the members are single.
Right.
Where are they? Right?
Yeah.
But by creating singles wards, we have siphoned off so much of our population that's not even visible to the church membership that is looking the way that it's, quote, supposed to look. And so we don't know how, we continue this stigma of not knowing how to interact with each other, of not recognizing how full our community is, of not recognizing what single members bring and what their needs might be. All of that. This separation of singles wards from conventional wards. In the course of doing this research, I became less and less persuaded that this was ultimately serving the single members well and the broader church population.
Yeah, and that's my initial observation too. It still boggles my mind how totally bereft of guidance my family and just people I know back home seem to be with like thinking about the life of an unmarried person and what their questions are and the things that they're facing. It does feel like the isolation is really preventing us from grappling with this, and it's hindering growth on both sides, I think. Which actually, I think it's really worth pointing out that the church has been aware of this. You wrote that in a 1970s priesthood manual. I'll read this. They were saying, we're going to have singles wards. This is helpful. Church activities where they can serve and benefit from each other. And then they said, isolation in special groups can hinder the development of spiritual growth and proper gospel attitudes. And so because of that, these should be temporary.
Right.
And anyway, I just think that's worth naming, that the church has been clear-eyed about this. Like, people seem to be having fun there. Let's let them keep having fun and maybe meet somebody. But it does seem like there's been this awareness that it can hinder spiritual growth. And it seems like it has done that both for single members and for married people as well.
That's right. And then it also can prevent us from understanding each other, right? I mean, that we don't know how to identify with people who are different from us. And that was an experience that I had as well. So when I became old enough to be invited to leave the singles ward in New York, and I went to a conventional ward, I was very lucky. I was nervous about it. I didn't know if I would feel like I had a place. I didn't know if I would feel comfortable there. But I fortunately was given a calling in music, which is something that's important to me. And the coordinator for music in that ward was great about reaching out and had me over for dinner with their family. And I just felt scooped up in and included. And I thought, oh my goodness, why didn't I do this a long time ago? Because it was so nice to just go and feel valued by people who were not in my peer group, just because we're all valuing each other and not necessarily for any particular motive of getting married, something like that.
I think honestly, I have always been, even I remember being 24, 25, 26, and asking all these questions. I went to BYU as well, and then lived in Salt Lake City afterward for several years. So I spent a good 11 years of my single adult life in Utah. And I have always been anti-single. Like basically, essentially, once I left BYU, I really struggled with it. I struggled with feeling like I wasn't a part of the full body of Christ, and I wasn't sure why. And I really struggled with that meat market thing I was describing earlier. But one of the things that I think is most damaging is you were touching on it earlier, Sharon, the idea that this is a problem, that
Mhm.
we're almost hidden away, that it feels like
Mm,
you are defined by what you don't have. It honestly, to me, almost puts us in this perpetual state of denial. Whereas there's something about just, linking arms with the other people around you, regardless of their age or their family situation or what's going on in their lives, and digging in your community versus being put into this box labeled single and just like never ever forget that's your problem and that's your label, versus feeling like there's more acceptance to your life as it is and all the things that you can do and offer if you're not being labeled like that. I know we all are covered in labels all the time, but that single
mm,
label, I
Yeah.
just have seen it. I've just seen it like make so many people's like heads just hang lower than they should. I
yeah.
really feel that for both men and women, that the some of the conversations and what comes up at like different activities, it just feels like it's just so present, and I don't know that it needs to define us so much.
Yeah, this is a real conundrum, I think. I remember a time my dad is so reliable and enthusiastic about the gospel. And
Mm,
after I'd been single for a long time. I don't remember it, but probably at least 12 years or something. I was home, we were having some kind of conversation, and I was expressing that it is heavy to be
mm,
alone, and especially to be in a church that I I think so beautifully values families. Like I care about my family. I always have valued and considered myself to be a part of a family, whether I had my own nuclear family or not. So I agree with all of that, but it's just heavy and hard. And
yeah.
my dad said, "So what can we do about this?" I said, "Well, Dad, I don't know if there's anything to do. I have a fulfilling life. I'm grateful for it. I do a lot of things that I enjoy. I feel like I'm part of a family and lots of community and friends, but that I would still like to have somebody that I am companion with permanently,
Hmm.
somebody who's a witness to my life. I don't know that I'm supposed to have that resolved if that's still not a part of my life." And so you're in this position of having to hold tension all the time,
Hmm.
which is an invisible and exhausting part of being single that I don't know that members really
Yeah.
recognize if they haven't
Right.
experienced it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, there's so many times for me too where I'm really like, what needs to happen? What do I need? And on a deep spiritual level, I get this sense of like nothing. You
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
be okay where you are. I did want to push back on some of this conversation though, if that's okay with you both.
Please.
Do it.
Of
Get in.
just wanting to play the devil's advocate a little bit. I was trying to read about singles in other religious communities, and it struck me how for them the refrain is constantly, we need more spaces for singles.
Mhm.
We need more opportunities for singles to lead, not just be passive recipients of the sermon or the lesson or whatever, but to lead, to serve, to meet each other and develop friendships, and to be able to talk about questions and unique challenges facing singles in this life stage. And it just struck me that I think what we suffer from in our church is a really strong light that's just constantly shining on singleness, such that we're like, get this light out of my eyes. I'm done. I just want to feel like a normal person. And that's so real. At the same time, it does feel like there's not enough of a light on this in other communities, and they just feel like swallowed in darkness, and nobody will shine
Mm,
enough light on them to see them at all.
Right.
And it does feel like there might be a grass is always greener situation going on here. that I wonder if it's worth balancing out somehow. I just wanted to reflect on this a little bit because if I'm being honest, as much as I feel a little bit insulted sometimes by the notion of a singles ward, I went to a family ward for a while after I turned 31, did not have a great experience there. I felt completely
Mhm.
invisible. And obviously, it totally depends on the ward and
Sure.
how present and self-aware and generous and outgoing other people are. But I ended up going back to the singles ward because I was like, you know what? There are people who see me in the singles ward
Right.
and who are capable of seeing me. And I don't know that the family ward next door is willing to do that. I feel like it has been really effective for me in keeping me anchored in community.
Yes.
I have to say there are relationships I have with people I've met there over the years. They feel sacred to me. And even the
Mhm.
fact that they can relate to the singleness and the way that we've lived these secret lives away from the fairy tale we were supposed to have, that is such a sacred thing to hold with other
Mm.
people. I guess it's my observation that they actually are effective in retention. And I'm wondering why that is, and whether they're worth keeping around for that reason.
Yeah, that's such a good question. When I did this research, Claudia Bushman said, you need to take a position. You need to take a stand. Don't just write the research. You
Mm-hmm.
need to make a recommendation.
Mm.
And so what I ended up recommending was that perhaps we should phase out singles wards after mid-20s, which is generally about the age that people who get a college degree might graduate, et cetera.
Mhm.
Um, but Diana, you're bringing up all these really important points of the way that they have been valuable to people. And whenever I have, you know, said this recommendation to people, especially to people who are in singles wards, the pushback is, I'm not comfortable going. I would not feel welcome. I would not feel like I had a place of belonging
Mm-hmm.
if not for this community, this singles ward.
Yeah.
And that's very real, right? That's a real concern, and I think we have to take it seriously. So Clayton Christensen came and spoke to a group about this topic. And when he had been an area authority, and so he's going around visiting different stakes in the eastern United States, he would meet with the stake president and the stake relief study president, and he would ask them in advance of the meeting to go through the role of the entire stake and to mark whether people were active in the church or not, and what their marital status was, and whether or not they had a calling that had them participating in ward council. And what he found was that rates for members who were single, activity rates were much lower. And that where those numbers changed is if somebody had the opportunity to serve in the ward council. If they were folded into
Mm.
service of the ward in that way, then their activity rates were higher. It was interesting to me that opportunities to serve in meaningful ways in your church community were the
Yeah.
thing that at least he identified as having a measurable effect
Mm-hmm.
in helping people be more active. Yeah.
Well, and I would love to see so much more of that.
Right.
I think if singles wards were to be done away with at some point, there would be a lot of blessings that come with that. I think it would just feel like we could be a little bit more honest about who we are, which is we are not
Yes.
single and married people. We are just people,
People.
children of God.
Mhm.
And it feels like there could be a little bit more of a theological purity
Right.
to our
Mhm.
organizational structure, which I think would just feel good and whole.
Mhm.
I think that would be nice. If, though, we're going to keep them, I wish we could take the reins and infuse it with a new sense of purpose and vocation. Why not just lean into the fact of like, you've got a lot of people here potentially with time on their hands. They don't have children. I'm not saying single people aren't busy, but
Sure.
let's make every singles ward, every singles branch apply for a grant once a year and do a big community service project.
Cool. Yeah.
Or
Mhm.
let's have them deliberately build ties with local conventional
Mhm.
wards and figure out how to really build relationships with families that need help.
Yep.
How can we just infuse a singles ward with actual vocation and a sense of purpose that fits the shape of a single life? Because I think that's what we want, right? We want
Right.
to feel
Yes.
spiritually whole. And
Mhm.
because the singles ward premise just feels so unclear, like, why are we here? And the older you get, I think the more we like grow out of those purposes. And the only reason is like, I don't know, but there's such lovely, beautiful souls here who get
Yes.
it. I think there's an opportunity there to infuse it with more purpose. So if singles wards are here to stay, I guess I would like to lean harder into that leadership direction. But I
Mhm.
would like us to think beyond just like board council. Let's think bigger about like we want to be involved in our world. That's the gift of being single, right? Is you have time and space to get creative with your
Right.
life. And I think we could do that with singles wards as well.
Building on what you're saying, the single adult membership of the church has so many gifts and talents and
Mm-hmm.
experiences that, among other things, knowing how to have meaningful adult relationships, because that's what you foster.
Yeah.
You need that to have your own community of support. And it's a beautiful thing. If you don't know, get to be friends with single members of the church because they can be really fantastic, insightful, fun friends and to have good adult relationships with. Yeah.
Well, and often have been through multiple transitions, multiple
Right.
cities, different school programs. There are a lot of opportunities to learn how to make a whole new group of friends over
Mhm.
and over again.
Yeah.
And I do think that we have a lot of gifts to offer each other. And one of the things that I'm really liking about what you're saying, Diana, is that if we just had a more express intention, and
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like that's probably, if I were going to just say two huge issues that I feel are just present in every part of what we've been discussing, it's visibility, like the visibility
Mm.
not just of the number of single people, but also of the life of a single person.
Mm-hmm.
I think respect and understanding for that, and not just pity or
Mhm.
honestly like repulsion, which
Right.
can sometimes feel a
Yeah.
little bit like I don't
Or
want to.
suspicion and discomfort. I actually said this one time in when I was attending a convention ward. I can feel that married members of the ward, especially the men, are unsure of how much they should talk to me.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and I understand that we want to be protective of our closest marriage relationships, but it's okay. That's what I mean about you can have adult relationships, adult friendships with other
Yeah.
people, and that's beautiful. That's a good
Yeah.
thing. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. To
Don't think
feel
because I'm single that I'm trying to seduce you.
Right.
it's a real thing though. And
Uh-huh.
but yeah, to have more of a brother-sister relationship in our congregations. Because yeah, I've sometimes felt a little bit like a little bit of a scarlet lady, not just at church, sometimes in the workplace
Mm,
too, but being because I worked in Utah for a long time where most people
Right.
were married pretty young. And
Mhm.
so I'm just that single woman. You suddenly realize, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to be alone in this room with my coworker, but we're
Uh-huh.
partners and we have to write this. So
yeah.
I guess
Well,
I'm glad I'm a responsible adult, you know?
and I think what you're both touching on here, if we are going to have a good place of belonging for single members of the church, it can't just be something that the single members of the church have to address and deal with.
Mm-hmm.
That summer that I went and did the seminar on and did this research paper on the history of singles wards, that summer I ended up meeting the person that I've now married. And so, haha, then it's cute.
Yeah, you're writing your
It,
paper
it, it,
on
it, it turned out in a great way, but I felt really strongly as that relationship developed. And my husband is older than I am and had been single the whole time as well. And we just really never wanted to forget, because a lot of times you'll see people who are single and then they get married and they just like they never look back
no.
at the
The
community
veil
that
goes
they
over their eyes and they
Yeah.
right,
don't they block it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what? Who? Me? No.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. And in general, if members of the church, whether single or married, can be interested in the single membership of the church, I think that's critical,
Right.
right?
I just want to salute you, Sharon, for doing exactly what you just
I
said. I
know.
do have to say, Diana, I don't know if this was your experience as well, but I can feel a palpable difference with my friends who got married a little later.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
the way
Yeah.
they ask questions, the interest that they
Mm-hmm.
take in my life, there just seems to be a lot less unfamiliarity, sure, but also discomfort. Like
Mhm.
they're comfortable
Right.
in that arena, understanding the uncertainty. And I think most of that is probably just people wanting to be polite, but that is even more like it's even more positioning us to feel like singleness is like some kind of disease you need to be really
Right.
kind about.
Totally.
And if we could be better, so if we could work on the visibility issue, and then if singles wards stay, if they're going to be around, if they could have a more express purpose, so that we're not making these assumptions. I guess I'm
Mm,
not fulfilling the purpose. Like I'm here
yeah.
and I didn't get married and it's 9 years in.
Uh-huh.
And it could be more like, no, singles wards are for the development of people who are single.
Mhm.
They're to help you create as much purpose with the exact situation you're in. And
Mhm.
it's not about getting married. And I don't even really know how to orient around retention because that feels like we're going to go to church or we're not going to go to church. But if you
Mhm.
understand, if I need support in my life as a single person, then I can go to this place where there are other single people and we can have lots of things in common
Yeah.
and we can take classes on finances and a lot of the things that you have to handle all by yourself. That is actually like another part of the
Right.
visibility issue where like not really understanding this is actually quite a bit of work to keep like
Right.
one adult alive with
Right.
nobody's ever able to tap in when you're sick or
Right.
anything like that. No one
Yep.
can drive you to you. There's a lot of like public transport and like Ubers to and from the airport.
Yes, you have to manage a household, and you
Yes.
Right.
you have to manage a household, and you have to manage your own emotional, social, spiritual, mental, physical health without the sort of support system of somebody to do those kinds of things with. And that is something that I noticed as I got older, and it crept in gradually, but it takes a lot of internal strength to just keep yourself upright. And
Yeah,
that's
Mhm.
something
it
that,
does.
if you haven't experienced it, it's very hard to even identify that's a thing that somebody's dealing with. Mm.
Totally. Speaking to that difficulty of holding yourself upright, there's been a couple times when dating's been going well for a season. I'm like, wow,
Mhm.
maybe there's a way out. And it's just been so interesting to observe that the older I've gotten, whenever I've had that glimpse of possibility, I get filled with this sense of, oh no, what if I leave my people behind? There's so much like hidden pain and strength and beauty here that just is so unattended for that I too feel like a
Mhm.
call to like care for it. And the
Mhm.
sense that if I got married, I was going to abandon my people was just like and by my people, I just mean like the people who have had stories like mine and who relate to this, yeah, to that difficulty of staying upright and of really having to figure out how to do life on your own. It's a really heavy thing to carry, and we need people to carry it with us. I would just love to be in a church where I wasn't accustomed to people looking at my life and internally thinking that is my nightmare. I want people who
Mhm.
are willing to go there with me
Yes.
and be with me in it. And I'll be honest, that's why I the part of me wants singles wards to stay is because at least right now, I know that's where people will do it with me. And I'm
Right.
not sure I have that kind of confidence yet in family wards.
Hmm.
We need to get there. And that's part of the problem is the singles wards might not help us, but I don't know that they're there right now.
Yeah,
Well,
I
one
think
podcast at a time.
I love that because I would say, Diana, I think my current feeling is that my long view hope is that they go away. I don't know how long it will take,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure how we get there, but I love the idea of what we're describing about the community that you've experienced and we've all experienced with our other single people can happen with married people and divorced people and widowed people. And we can start to I guess blur the lines of what a support system really needs to look like, that we don't need to be in the exact same situations to understand that we've all lived through a nightmare. We've all
Totally.
lived through a nightmare and we'd like to accompany each other because we all had friends who popped up for us in the nightmare. And I just think I think if they go away, we have this beautiful opportunity to be able to, yeah, just dissolve some of these ideas about this transitionary phase, even like the idea that getting married would mean that you needed to leave your people behind. I completely understand that. And I've also felt left behind before,
Mhm.
but I really don't think it needs to be that way. But
Yeah.
it has a lot to do with the way that we look at singleness, I think.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
Totally.
I don't know if this is worth saying as a tag on or not, but I did have the opportunity before I left New York to be a part of an interfaith conversation with other people who were thinking about the status of being single in their church or faith communities, I should say.
Yeah.
There was somebody who was from an evangelical perspective and somebody who was from a Jewish perspective, and I believe Muslim. And that was really eye-opening and beautiful for me to realize this is not just unique to the LDS Church, right? There are a lot of people who feel these cross pressures and are trying to navigate their place of faith and community and being single all over. And so even if we don't know who those people are, it gave me a sense of, okay, we're not as isolated or alone in this as it might feel sometimes.
Absolutely.
But also just done exactly what you were just describing, which is see how we fit into the broader spectrum of dating culture and singleness and loneliness in the world. We are not alone with these issues, and the plates are shifting. If Sharon, your writing has done anything for me, it's taught me that we have evolved along the way trying to figure this out together. And I think trusting that, especially if we keep talking, we keep speaking up. And even on the local level, I've been really impressed with my local stake. There are so many single people on state council. And there are just lots of opportunities to make small changes and to try things out together. It's not set in stone. We're a part of the restoration, you're out together.
Right. Right. There's a lot to be hopeful about, for sure.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
Oh, this was a pleasure. I love talking about this, and thanks both of you for all of your ideas and for your time.
Thanks for joining for our conversation today. We know we didn't exhaust this topic completely, so feel free to share your thoughts with us online. You can find us on Instagram, instagram.com/the_soloists, and we can't wait to have more conversations like this with you all.